Hello and welcome everyone. We're really excited to have everyone here today for our weekly OCI deep dive. For those of you who are new to our events, we're hosted on Cloud Customer Connect, our Oracle community forums for end users. I'll share resources in the chat throughout the presentation that take you to the CCC forums, and we invite you to create a free account, join in discussions, and look for upcoming events on all kinds of topics. I'm Maria Philip, Product Marketing Manager with the OCI Go-to-Market team. And today we're joined by presenters Marcus Doeringer and Austine Ouma, who are both data modernized specialists on the Oracle EMEA Data Platform Specialist team. We also have Amalraj Putensira, who will handle the Q&A questions. And he's also data modernized specialist on the Oracle EMEA Data Platform Specialist team. Feel free to raise any questions in the Q&A box at any time during the webinar. The topic of today's webinar is Accelerate Your Data Migration into Oracle Autonomous Database. Our presenters will share how you can easily migrate your data into the Oracle Autonomous Database. They will teach you how to use the data load feature on the OCI Console, how to use SQL Developer Data Import Wizard to load data from many sources, and how to use OCI Database Migration for Oracle databases, as well as offline and online methods. Before I hand things over to Marcus and Austine, I'd like to run a quick poll. So let me launch the poll here. There's only one question to this poll. While you respond to the poll, I also want to share about our event next week. On Thursday, August 31st at 10 a.m. CET, we'll have a webinar on serverless architectures in OCI, where you'll learn how OCI functions work and the numerous integrations with OCI services that can enhance your applications. Please join for that event next week. I will also share the link to all our future events in the chat. And our quick housekeeping reminders, we encourage you to use the Q&A window at the bottom of your screen for any questions during the presentation. Our presenters will be looking to that Q&A box and not the chat, so make sure to ask your questions in the Q&A box so they don't get missed. And of course, we're recording today's presentation, so if your colleagues were unable to make it or you'd like to return to this content, I'll share the link to the replay later on as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. There we go. And so that's enough for me. Marcus and Austine, please go ahead and take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. Hello and welcome everybody to today's session, Accelerate Your Data Migration into Oracle Autonomous Database. My name is Marcus and I'm here today with my colleagues Austine and Amalraj, and we are part of the EMEA Data Modernise Specialists team. So let's have a look at today's agenda and the topics we will cover. So first we will give a general overview about the migration to Autonomous Database, and then we will directly jump over to the public cloud, to OCI, and show you 3 different scenarios, from a simple data load with OCI Console data load, then a data bump import with SQL Developer, and finally also how to set up online migrations with OCI Database Migration. Now, before we jump into the migration topic, let's have a short summary about what Oracle Autonomous Database is. So Autonomous Database is a fully automated database service with built-in machine learning, and it provides automated tuning, scaling, and also patching. It's built on Oracle Exadata, and it delivers the highest performance, availability, and also security. And we have different deployment models of Autonomous. So we offer it, of course, in the public cloud in OCI. There we have the Autonomous Database Serverless and Autonomous Database Dedicated. But we also offer Autonomous Database in the customer data center as Autonomous Cloud at Customer, where we basically ship an Exadata to the customer data center, but also with dedicated region Cloud at Customer, which is more or less a complete OCI infrastructure at the customer data center. Now, when you provision an autonomous database, this is really easy, and you just need a few parameters like the number of CPUs, how many storage you would like to have. And within a few minutes, you have your first autonomous database running and have access to all these cool new features and functionality. And that's probably fine if you start from scratch or develop a new application. But most of the time, you already have some existing data or existing databases that you want to load or migrate into the autonomous database. So when we look at cloud migration or migration solutions in general, we have lots of different tools how we can migrate databases or data into autonomous or into databases in general. So you probably have heard them before or are familiar with them. We can use Recovery Manager, we can use PDB, Unplug, Plug, Remote Cloning, Data Guard, and also our new cloud migration tools like Zero Downtime Migration or OCI Database Migration. But before we start with a migration, we normally classify a migration between a physical migration and a logical migration. So what is the difference between these two? And maybe let's step back from the database for now. And let's say we have a text file sitting on a hard disk, and we want to migrate this file to another hard disk. So when we do a physical migration, we just simply copy the file over to the new hard disk. So we end up with the same file on the new hard disk. And this is a physical migration where we really do a blockwise copy. Now, in a logical migration, we would not copy the file. We would just create a new file on the new hard disk. And this can also be, you see, it has a new name, it has a new extension, it can even be for a different program. And then we just mark the text that we want to copy, and we really copy that text into this new document. And of course, we also don't need to copy the full text. We just can only copy specific text out of this document. So this is a logical migration. We really bring out the data, and then we copy or we paste it and load it into the new document. And the same applies for databases. So if we have a database, in this case 12.2 running on Linux, we just copy the data files to the target system. We start the database, we end up with the same database system like we had on source. That's a physical migration. Whereas in a logical migration, again, we have our 12.2 database on Linux here again. In that case, we spin up a new target system. This is an autonomous database running already on 19C. And then we export the data and we import and load the data into autonomous database. And normally it depends of lots of different things if we want to go with a physical migration and a logical migration. But when we are talking about migrating to autonomous, there's a simple rule, and that is if the target or when the target is an autonomous database, we are always doing a logical migration. And the reason for that is how the service is built, because in autonomous, we don't have access to the underlying operating system, and we don't have access to the underlying container database. So we can't just simply copy over data files, or we can't use Recovery Manager to do a restore on the autonomous database. We really have to extract the data and then load the data into the autonomous database. So that means when our target is an autonomous database, we also need to find a tool or a migration method that supports logical migration, which means we can't use things like Recovery Manager or PDB unplug plug, for example. We also can't use Data Guard to set up a Data Guard on CDB level. We really need a tool that supports logical migration like Databump, SQL Developer, or ZDM and DMS. So the key thing is, we talked about that we are not migrating databases, we are really migrating data. We have to extract the data and then load the data. And for that, we have two different ways of doing that. The first one is we can do it directly. So for example, if you already have your data in a file that you really want to load into autonomous database, or you can also think of using database links from autonomous to the source database and then pulling the data directly into autonomous database. But with bigger databases and with bigger data, what we normally use is a staging area, and this is OCI object storage. So we extract the data from the source, we upload it to OCI object storage, and from the object storage, we load it into autonomous database. One important thing that I also want to mention here is the Cloud Pre-Migration Advisor tool, or CPAD. This tool it's a small little Java program that is available for download under this support node here. And this program you can basically run on your source database, and what it does, it scans your source database. There are a lot of checks that the tool is doing, and it shows you potential issues when migrating the database to autonomous database. So for example, here is one of the checks that the tool is executing. And in that database, I created a table with an ORD image column, a multimedia object type column. And the tool basically says you have that table in your source database, and multimedia object types cannot be used in autonomous database. So there will be a failure if you want to, or an error when you try to migrate this table to autonomous. If you want to learn more, and especially how to plan a migration to autonomous and what things you need to consider when preparing, like CPAT I've shown you before, how to execute the migration, what tools are available, and finally how to validate, we have a brand new website out there on the oracle.com/database/cloud migration that has lots of information about all these steps. So basically we see the MiGADB database that Austine was showing. We have the database actions, and we have the data load here. So you have various options to load the data, like loading into autonomous database. We can link the data and feed the data. And when we load the data, we have the option to specify files. We can directly load it from databases or from the cloud object store. And in this example, we will use just a local file. So that is the use case if you have some data in a local file that you want to load into autonomous. So I click on next here, and then I just select my file here. And in this case, it's a CSV file, but we also support lots of other different file types to load into autonomous database. And before we start the load here, let's click here and select the settings. So here are lots of things you can configure when you want to load this file into autonomous database. So you can basically specify if you want to create the table, if you want to insert into the table, replace the data, or just merge the data. We can even change the table name here. We can then specify lots of other things, and here on the bottom you also see the columns that will be created in the table. So we can also change the data types here. We can change the target column name and things like that. When you click here on preview, you also see what is inside this CSV file and what will be loaded. And finally, you also have the possibility here to show the SQL that is executed. And let me just click on close here. So what we will do now is we will start that import. And of course, it was really, really fast because we only have 5 rows in that CSV file. So you now see everything is completed. And what I do now is I go again to the job, and here I now have a job report that shows we have successfully processed 5 rows, and there was 0 rows rejected, and you see you get a start time and a processing time, how long it took to load the data. So that is probably the simplest way to load data to autonomous. That's if you have your data in a local file or on a object storage file, and you just want to load that data into autonomous database.
Okay, thanks, Marcus. So the next thing that we are going to show here is how to use SQL Developer to import your data into an autonomous database. And so the assumption here is that we already have an export file, loaded into your object storage bucket. So I will show you that here I already have a bucket available. We have created a bucket called MIG bucket. And you can see that in this bucket, we already have an export data dump file. Let me just show you here. We already have the data dump, which is exp.dmp. This is what I'm actually going to be, importing into my autonomous database using SQL Developer. So the first thing that we need to do here is to create a pre-authenticated request, which basically will give SQL Developer access to this dump file in object storage, okay? So what I need to do here is to just quickly click on those three buttons and then create a pre-authenticated request. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the availability to only the object, just one object in that bucket. You could play around with the access type, which could either be read, write, or read and write. But in this instance, we're just going to be reading that file. So that's basically it. What I need to do is to create a pre-authenticated request. Boom, and that's it. So what I need to do is to copy this link, okay? Because this is the link that we are going to use on SQL Developer to allow SQL Developer to access that dump file. So I paste it in a notepad somewhere and move on. So that's the first thing you need to do. The next thing that we need to do is to make sure that we create the credential on the autonomous database, allowing the autonomous database to read the dump file in object storage, okay? So the next thing that I need to do is to actually create an authentication token for the user who is actually going to be doing the import using SQL Developer. So what I'm going to do is in my profile, I click on my user link here, okay? And then as that loads, I will scroll down to this resources area and click on auth tokens. This auth token is what is going to be the password of the database credentials that I'm going to create on SQL Developer that allows me to access the dump file in object storage. So what I do is I just click on generate token. Let me give it a name. Say, for example, import token, okay? And then I just click on generate token. What you need to do is to copy that token, paste it somewhere, because we are going to be asked for this information when we are creating the database credentials. So I have that copied. And so that basically captures everything I need to do on the OCI console before I get to the SQL Developer screen. So let me move on to SQL Developer at the moment. I hope you're able to see my SQL Developer screen. In here, I already have a connection, okay? I've already created the MigADB instance, which is the autonomous database we were referring to in the console. And what I need to do is to use the DBMS cloud package and create credential procedure to create the credentials for me to use this SQL Developer or the autonomous database to connect to our object storage packets, okay? So what I need to do is to just execute this command. So let me just copy that for you on screen, and then we are going to execute this to create the credential, okay? So you can see the package and the procedure to create a credential. You can give your credential whatever name you prefer. Of course, I'm going to be using my username here. And then in the password, this is where you actually copy the auth token that we had generated earlier on, okay? So your password is going to be the auth token that we had actually copied earlier on. So let me just copy that and paste it in here, in between the two quotes, okay? So please always have the quotes available. There we go. And all I need to do is to execute this command, okay? 1 second. I execute that, and you know, my credentials will actually, so sorry, these must have timed out. Let it just reconnect. There we go. So if you have a scenario where your credentials already exist, then you can just run this command to drop it and recreate it again. So let me just do that because it seems that that credential already exists. So what I'm going to do is to execute this command to drop it, okay, and then run my credential again. Okay, just selecting it for visibility. There you go, you can see that your credential was created. Now, once we have that, the next thing you need to do is to go to your DBA pane in SQL Developer, because this is where you find your database administration tasks. You know, this is where you're going to find the data pump SQL import wizard and export wizards, okay? If you do not have this screen available, then all you need to do is to click on View, and under the View pane, you'll be able to see DBA. So you can actually click on this, and then this part will actually be loaded for you. Okay, so what I need to do is to click on that to add my MigADB instance, and you can see that that is actually added on here. And with that, so you can see what I was basically talking about. You have a lot of DBA, monitoring and control tasks for your database, things to do with your data pump, performance, backups, and things like that. For this demo, we are interested in data pump. So what I need to do is to, select data pump, and then click on import jobs, because what we are doing is we are going to be importing into that database. And then I click on data pump import wizard. And once I do that, you can see that the import wizard is loaded. And for people who've done export imports, you'll be very familiar with what the options that you actually get to see here. So what I just need to do is to, for example, give a job name. So let's just call this probably import test or something for that. Like that, you can choose to load your data in DDL or just your DDL or, move your data. Depending on how you did your export, you can choose to, import the full database or use schema. Oracle always recommends your schemas. So in this instance, I'm going to select a schema. And then under choose input files, what I need to do is to provide the database credentials that we created and the pre-authenticated request that we had actually copied from the dump file that we had seen in object storage. So what I do is I click here, and I will be able to see the credential that we just created. So that is what I pick here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the pre-authenticated file link that I had copied earlier from the object storage, okay? So what I do is I just copy that information here. There you go. And then you just click on next. Now, if everything has been set up correctly, you'll be able to see a list of schemas from the dump file that you have actually posted in your object storage bucket. So we just wait, and you should be able to see your schemas loading here. If you don't see a schema, then it basically means that there is a problem somewhere with your credentials, or it could be something to do with your database or something for that matter. So there we go. We see that we have one schema that has been loaded, HR schema, and this is what we are going to import into the database. So I just click on that schema, and I proceed to the next stage. If I need to remap my schemas, or if I need to remap my table spaces, then you're also free to do that. We are not going to do that in this demo, so I can just click on next. And then you can choose to up your parallel parameters. You can select, a storage area for your import logs and things like that. Let me just leave this as the default. And then I can go to next, and you can choose to run your job either immediately, or you can schedule it to run at a later stage. So in this case, I'm just going to run this immediately. And at the end here, you just get a summary of some of the things that we've done. It basically just shows you that we are importing into this database called MigADB. We are doing a schema import, okay, of the HR schema with the several options that we had actually picked earlier. And all I do is to click on finish, and the autonomous database will be importing that data. So as that is running, I deliberately picked a very small database just so that we do not waste a lot of time. You can see the details of what's happening. And at the bottom here, you'll be able to see things that are familiar with the SQL Developer Import Wizard actually importing the data into the autonomous database. So at the end here, we can see that the PL SQL procedure has been successfully completed, meaning that our import has actually happened. So what I would like to do is to take you back to our OCI console where we have our database, and I'll be able to show you the logs of that operation that we just did. So I go to the autonomous database, click on the autonomous database here, look at the database itself, click on that database. And then under database actions, I click on view all database actions. And then I scroll down here under administration to the data pump link, okay? So I click on data pump, and I can see that 2 data pump operations have been run against this database. Let me just refresh so that I'm able to see. So these are the tests. I mean, these are the import jobs that we just we've run on this database. We look at the most current one, which is the imp test. So you remember I called my job imp test. The SD here basically just shows you that we have an import job from SQL developer. So this is just to show you that our import job actually happened. The tick here basically means that something, the operation was kind of successful. If you want to view the logs, all I need to do is to click on view logs here, and I'll be able to see the log of the import job that I just carried out. So you can see that the tables were imported from the HR schema, and you can see at the end that the jobs completed successfully. So remember, this is just one of the ways to load data into the autonomous database. You can use SQL Developer, you can use the data load function, you can use CLI, and you can also see how to load data into the autonomous database using data migration services, which my colleague Marcus is going to show you next. So thank you for that. I hope you enjoyed it. Marcus, please take it away.
Okay, so you have seen now a demo how to import a dump file that you first need to export from the source database and then upload to the object storage, and from there import with the SQL Developer import wizard. But I will show you now a tool that does everything of that fully end-to-end automated, and it's called OCI Database Migration, or DMS. And DMS is a fully managed cloud service in OCI. It's free, so you can start and run migrations for 6 months. And it also supports offline and online migrations. And I will show you in a minute how to configure an online migration. Now, the important thing is OCI Database Migration, you can think of it more like an orchestration tool. So this is not a new way how to migrate database or a new technology. OCI Database Migration uses existing tools like Databump and Golden Gate to actually execute the migration. And it also uses a tool called Zero Downtime Migration. Maybe you have heard that before. Zero Downtime Migration is actually the engine that does the actual migration, like logging into the source system, running the export, uploading everything to the object storage. And you can also download the Zero Downtime Migration as a software and install it on a server, and then configure and run it manually. But OCI Database Migration is basically the fully managed ZDM service running in OCI. And how does it work? So we have our source databases, and then we have OCI Database Migration that connects to the source database and extracts the data, uploads to object storage, and then imports the data. And the nice thing with OCI Database Migration, it also has CBAT, the tool that I've shown you before that scans the source database. It has CBAT included and integrated. I will also show you that in a minute. And then if we decide to go with an offline migration, DMS uses Databump. We can choose to go with Database Link or with OCI Object Storage and do the import. And if we do an online migration, we also use Golden Gate then on top of that Databump import. And of course, we support autonomous database, but you can use DMS also to migrate to other database cloud services. So what versions and what platforms do we support with DMS? We basically support all sources from 11G up to 21C, so it's 11.204. And we support all Linux servers, AIX, Solaris, and also Amazon RDS. Windows is currently not supported as a source platform. So let's jump over now to DMS. And because of the short time we have today, we cannot do a full migration, but I have prepared a few things that then I will show you a little bit around in DMS right now. So you can find DMS when you click on this menu button here and then go to migration and disaster recovery, and here is database migration. And then you end up at this start screen here, which provides lots of useful information. There are live labs and other useful links. And the first thing you need to do when you want to do a migration is you need to define your database connections. So to tell DMS how to connect to your source database and how to connect to your target database. Now, I already have pre-created a few connections here, but normally you would go to create connection. You give it a name and a compartment, and then you need to specify a vault here. And this is something that needs created up front. So we need to have a vault because all the passwords for the connecting users we enter in DMS are stored encrypted in this vault here. And then you can basically manually configure your database. For example, if you have an on-prem database, you need to specify the host, the port, and the service name. But in our case, let's say we have an autonomous database, we can directly choose we want to configure a connection to an autonomous database, and it already has my database here connected. I also can choose to create a private endpoint if I'm in a private subnet. And as a next thing, I just need to enter username and password to tell DMS how to connect to the database. Okay, so you need to do that for all your sources and your targets. In my case, I already have created one for my source PDB, also for my source CDB. That is needed if you are doing an online migration. So in an online migration, you also need to have to connect to the CDB. And of course, my ADB target. And then we can basically go to migrations and we click on create migration, again, give it a name and specify a compartment. Here we can specify if we can have a direct connection to the source database. If it's not possible and we need to have a server as a bridge in between, we basically need to run an agent on that server, but it's also possible. And again, we need to specify our vault to store the passwords encrypted. And then I choose my source database. And I say this is a pluggable database. Then I also need to specify my container database. And as a target database, I choose my autonomous database here. Click on next. And here we can specify how to do the initial load. We can use database links, or we can go via object storage. For database links, we usually recommend only small databases because there are some limitations when it comes to parallelism. So we only recommend this for databases up to 100 gigabytes. So for larger databases, we should go with object storage. And in that case, we also need to specify a directory name and a directory path. That also needs to be pre-created in the source database up front. And then we also need to specify a bucket, the object storage bucket. This also needs to be pre-created up front. So DMS needs to upload the export to that bucket. And then we can also specify some additional parameters. For example, we can use exclude or include clauses. So if we just want to migrate a specific schema, for example, we can just say include and specify the schema name here. And we can also set a few additional parameters. If you're familiar with data bumps, you will probably recognize a few of them. So for example, how many processes we want to run the export in parallel on the source and on the target. But it's also fine to go with the default because by default, DMS already sets these to the recommended values. And basically you create your migration then, and this would be for an offline migration. So we just do the export, we upload it to object storage, and then we do the import into autonomous database. But we also can use DMS to run online migrations. And in that case, I need to check this here to say use online replication. And then I need to specify a few more parameters here, like Golden Gate hub and Golden Gate admin user and password. Now for that, we need a Golden Gate installation up and running. And you don't have to be a Golden Gate expert or administrator to configure Golden Gate manually. What we have provided is an image in the marketplace. So if you go here in the menu and choose marketplace, and then you search for Golden Gate, there is one image called Oracle Golden Gate Database Migrations image. I click on that one here. And you see this image is also free for 6 months. So you don't have to pay any license for Golden Gate for these kind of migrations. And you basically, this is an OCI resource manager script, a terraform script. You basically launch the stack. It just asks you for a few parameters like which network, the subnet and the server name and things like that. But with a few clicks, in a few minutes, you have a Golden Gate instance up and running that is fully configured. And also the deployment process gives you an URL at the end that you can just paste directly into this field here. And then you just need to specify the username and the password. And then we also need to specify Golden Gate users and passwords for the source and the target database, because we also need to create users in the source and target database. So we have a user that Golden Gate can connect to the databases. And basically that's it for the online migration. So what DMS does is it then connects to that Golden Gate instance, and during setup of the migration, it configures the replicate and the extract processes. I click on cancel now. So what I've prepared here is when you create your first migration, you basically end up in that state here. You have a migration that is active, and you also can change all of the parameters that you have specified during the creation of the migration. So it's no problem. You can change everything afterwards. What's also nice is you can clone an existing migration. So if you need to rerun a migration, or you need to change a few things, or maybe change the target, you can just clone it. And the first thing we would run now is a validate. And what a validate does is it basically runs through some checks. So we are checking, can we connect to the source database? Can we connect to the target database? Can we upload to the object storage? Is Golden Gate available? And I have prepared another migration here in a different state where I already executed the validate. And you see we have two jobs running here. The first job I run went to the failed state, and I want to show you why. So these are the phases that we run through the validate. As I said, we are checking a few things. And here you see the integration of the CPAD tool, the Cloud Pre-Migration Advisor tool. And in that case, it failed because I manipulated the source database, so we can see CPAD failing here. Let's click on here. And now you have a nice overview of all the checks that CPAD run on the source database. You can also select here the past one. So you get an overview of all the checks that have been run on the source database. And you see we have a check here with result action required, which is basically the same that I have shown you before in the presentation part about that table where I created that ORD image data type. And again, it says this is not or cannot be used in autonomous database. Now, the really nice thing here in DMS is I can directly click on that object here, and I can say exclude it from my migration, and then it will be added to the exclude list, which is a really nice feature. Okay, so in my case, I have cleaned up my database then and run the validate again. So you see the second time it succeeded, and all the different phases of the checks were completed successfully. And after the validate was successful, you can then start the migration. And when you start the migration, we also run through different phases. So we have one phase for the export, we have one phase for the upload to the object storage, then again for the import to set up the Golden Gate, and lots of different phases. And you can basically pause at any of the specific phases. So if you want to execute something manually in between a phase, you can pause between those phases. But when you do an online migration, what you want to do is you definitely want to pause at that phase here, monitor replication lag. And you see it's already selected by default because we are doing an online migration. So what that means is at that point, we are keeping the source and the target database in sync. So Golden Gate is already set up. Every DML we run on the source database is replicated on the target database, and we end up with two databases completely in sync. And then when you start your maintenance window, you just stop the application and you continue that migration to run the final switchover. So that will take a few minutes, and that's the duration, the maximum duration of downtime you have in your maintenance window. And then finally, you can start the application again. And I also have one migration where I run through all the phases. You see my migration was succeeded. Here you see all the different phases we run through. And finally, what you also can do in DMS, you can click here and download the export or the import log and directly have a look at the data pump log files to see what was going on through the export and the import. Okay, that was a short overview of DMS. Let me jump back. So that also brings us to the end of today's presentation. Thank you for joining today's session. If you want to learn more, you also have some links here. Again, the cloud migration webpage that has lots of useful information. But also we have a GitHub page for our EMEA specialist data platform Modernise team, where you also find lots of additional information and also videos. Okay, with that, back to Maria.
Great, wonderful. Thank you again, everyone, for attending and for all your great questions. And thanks so much, Amanraj, Marcus, and Austine. So we're wrapping it up then, and feel free to drop the webinar as you like. Thank you, and we hope to see you next time. Take care.